In the final quiet year before the world caught fire, the Royal Navy made a mistake it didn't yet recognize. Its corridors, normally stiff with routine, carried a strange, satisfied whisper in 1938. Vice Admiral Bertram Home Ramsay is resigning. At 55, after commanding the mighty HMS Hood and serving the fleet for more than 30 years, Ramsay wasn't defeated by war or failure, but by something pettier, a personality war. His superior at Dover, Admiral Sir Reginald Plunkett Mlur Earl Drax, possessed an ego as long as his name. The two men mixed like oil and cordite. Ramsay, exact and modern in his thinking, saw Drax as stuck in another era. Drax saw Ramsay as a troublemaker wrapped in competence. The Navy chose Drax. Ramsay chose retirement, or what he pretended was retirement. For 16 months he gardened in Buckinghamshire, tending marrows instead of men, while his wife watched a commander of thousands now command only a watering can. Naval colleagues in London muttered that such talent should never have been wasted, but Ramsay never complained. He watched Europe darken with tension and wondered if his story had ended in peacetime pettiness instead of wartime necessity. Then, on September 1, 1939, Hitler rewrote everyone's plans. War was declared 2 days later, and suddenly the Navy needed the very man it had pushed aside. The officers who'd once accepted his resignation now scrambled through files for his address. Their letters were formal, their apologies non-existent. Still, they asked, would Vice Admiral Ramsay return to service? He packed away his gardening tools without comment. On August 12, weeks before Britain officially entered the war but long after everyone knew it was coming, Ramsay returned to Dover, the same command where his clash with Drax had begun. But instead of polished offices, he was given the abandoned tunnels beneath Dover Castle. Napoleonic-era caverns carved out of the chalk cliffs, dripping with moisture, crowded with rusted equipment, and apparently ruled by territorial pigeons. His staff stared at the gloom and wondered if this was a punishment. Ramsay didn't. Where others saw rot and ruin, he saw potential. 70 feet underground, protected by solid cliff face, with commanding views of the Channel Narrows above, the medieval tunnels were the one thing modern engineering could not easily build, bomb-proof. Within weeks, work crews swarmed the passageways. The torches came first, then cables, lighting, telephone lines, plotting tables, ventilation systems. Ramsay turned the forgotten labyrinth into the Dover Naval Command Center, nicknamed the Dynamo Room after the generator humming at its core. He divided chambers by purpose: ship tracking, RAF coordination, communication with the Admiralty, and walls covered with enormous maps of the Channel sandbanks and French coastal inlets. His staff questioned why he catalogued every fishing harbor and civilian boat along the French coast. Ramsay didn't answer. He simply kept building. Through the autumn and winter of 1939, while the phony war lulled Europe into uneasy stillness, his underground headquarters grew. He recruited experts nobody expected, retired harbor masters, merchant captains, even an old ferry skipper who knew the channel by instinct. Traditional officers raised eyebrows. Ramsay ignored them. He was constructing something the Navy had never possessed before, though even he couldn't yet imagine how urgently it would soon be needed. And deep inside the chalk cliffs of Dover, the tunnels waited for the moment history would call them into action. And that moment was closer than anyone above ground realized. The tunnels beneath Dover had barely settled into their new rhythm when, in May 1940, the calm of the phony war shattered. Hitler's blitzkrieg tore through Belgium and the Netherlands with terrifying speed, and suddenly the quiet Warren Ramsay had built became the most advanced maritime nerve center Britain had ever possessed. The admiral the Navy once discarded now found himself responsible for something close to impossible, not from a polished London office, but from chalk-scented caverns older than the United States itself. This time, the Channel wasn't a barrier for invasion. It was a road home. On May 19th, a call from the Admiralty reached Ramsay underground. The voice carried that brittle calm people use when delivering disaster. The British Expeditionary Force was being crushed back toward the sea near a French port few civilians could even pronounce, Dunkirk. The War Office needed numbers. How many men could actually be pulled out before German armor reached the beaches? Ramsay studied charts under humming electric lamps. His analysis was brutal. Using destroyers and transports alone, forced to work from Dunkirk's damaged harbor under constant air attack, maybe 10,000 men over 2 days. If everything went right, if weather held, if German bombers stayed grounded, maybe 45,000. The Admiralty took the estimate with grim acceptance. 45,000 out of almost 300,000 meant losing the heart of Britain's trained army. It meant disaster, humiliation, and a political crisis for Churchill's barely 2-week-old government. But Ramsay saw something the numbers hid. That estimate assumed conventional thinking. So he asked unconventional questions. Could small craft reach the beaches directly? How many civilian boats in southern England could cross the channel? Could nearby French towns act as extra pickup points? His officers balked. The Royal Navy didn't operate fishing boats and weekend yachts. Dunkirk's beaches were too shallow for large ships, and the East Mole, the narrow breakwater, allowed loading only one vessel at a time. Ramsay listened, nodded, and asked the only question that mattered. If we reject unconventional options, then what? Leave the army to be captured? By May 20th, he was sketching the first version of what history would call Operation Dynamo. It broke every rule. He would use destroyers, ferries, pleasure craft, fishing trawlers, anything that floated. He would run operations through the night, despite navigation risk. He would open beach evacuations even though they were slow and vulnerable. His staff watched him shift from calm strategist to a man possessed. He demanded vessel lists from every harbor between Portsmouth and Great Yarmouth. Tide tables. Weather reports every 6 hours. New charts. More charts. Better charts. The War Office had asked him for an evacuation plan. Ramsay was constructing a miracle. On May 27th, his requisition orders went out, something unprecedented in British naval history. Britain's entire civilian maritime community was drafted into service. Yacht clubs, fishing groups, ferry companies, anyone with a seaworthy hull received a notice. Responses ranged from patriotic enthusiasm to stunned confusion. A retired lawyer in Ramsgate surrendered his 30-foot cruiser. A Thames tourboat captain suddenly found himself part of a war operation. Sunday leisure craft were now part of Britain's last hope. But requisitioning was only half the fight. The genius lay in coordination. Without structure, 800 small vessels rushing to Dunkirk would create chaos. Ramsay designed a system like a three-dimensional chessboard. Large destroyers and ferries would run to the harbor and the East Mole. Little ships, the shallow draft craft, would handle the beaches at Bray Dunes and La Panne. Medium coasters and trawlers would shuttle men from beaches to deeper waters, transferring them onto destroyers. Every category had assigned routes, timing windows, and contingency procedures. Dover's tunnels glowed with maps filled with colored markers shifting by the minute. Telephone lines multiplied. Radio operators worked non-stop. Even vessels with no radios received flag instructions, written orders, or shouted guidance from escort boats. By May 28th, the first waves set out. Destroyers like HMS Grafton and Grenade led the charge. Tourist ferries followed, boats that had once carried holidaymakers now heading for a coastline engulfed in smoke. Behind them came the little ships, fishing trawlers named Our Maggie and Boy Bruce, pleasure yachts like Sundowner, tiny cockleboats that had never before left calm estuary waters. Between May 26th and June 4th, the world compressed into 9 nights and days of chaos. From his chalk bunker 70 feet under Dover Castle, Ramsay directed a maritime ballet under conditions that would have broken lesser commanders. Each morning, German dive bombers screamed down with sirens wailing, psychological terror paired with high explosives. Reports arrived hourly. HMS Wakeful torpedoed in seconds, 640 men lost. French destroyer Bourrasque mined and sunk with packed decks. And yet Ramsay's operation continued, expanding beyond anything anyone had believed possible. Even as destroyers and trawlers vanished beneath smoke-choked seas, the work continued. The paddle steamer Crested Eagle, set ablaze by German bombers, burned like a floating torch visible for miles. Every loss meant not just the destruction of ships but the deaths of hundreds and a shrinking fleet for the next crossings. Still, Ramsay never hesitated. He updated vessel counts constantly, weighing time against the tightening German ring around the Dunkirk pocket. The East Mole, a narrow, 1,300-yard wooden runway stretching into deep water, quickly became the heart of the evacuation. Never designed for heavy ships, it now hosted destroyers mooring along its fragile edge while troops filed aboard in painfully slow single columns. Ramsay had initially dismissed the Mole as too exposed and too unstable. His harbor master's insistence proved decisive. Without it, tens of thousands stuck on the beaches would never have escaped. But the mole carried its own dangers. One badly handled approach could block the entire structure. One accurate bomb could cut the walkway in half and trap every ship alongside it. Yet night after night the procession continued, warships easing in, filling decks until no more bodies could be squeezed aboard, then reversing out as the next vessel slid into place. Ramsay barely left the tunnels except for brief rests. His staff rotated in shifts, but their admiral remained a fixed point, drinking tea, surviving on sandwiches, eyes fixed on plotting boards. Reports poured in non-stop. Wireless messages from destroyers firing at German batteries. Phone calls from the Admiralty scheduling replacement ships. Weather forecasts covering the next 12 hours. RAF liaisons advising where fighter protection could be sent and where it could not. Most commanders would have drowned in the flood of information. Ramsay absorbed it and translated it into constant micro-adjustments that kept the evacuation from collapsing. Night crossings brought new nightmares. Ships navigated by compass through waters blackened with smoke, wreckage, and burning oil. Debris from sunken craft drifted everywhere, capable of holding a hull as lethally as enemy fire. To prevent collisions, Ramsay created separate inbound and outbound lanes across the channel, and stationed rescue craft along the routes to recover crews from boats that didn't survive the crossing. Some vessels managed only one trip before limping home too damaged to continue. Others made 5, 7, even 10 runs until machinery gave out or enemy fire finally caught them. The little ships, those tiny civilian craft, proved both essential and fragile. Their shallow draft let them scrape right up to the beaches, but their wooden hulls were vulnerable to machine gun bursts that would have scarcely dented a destroyer. When the final ship left the burning ruins of Dunkirk in the early hours of June 4th, Ramsay's staff began assembling the numbers that would determine whether Operation Dynamo had been a miracle or merely an attempted rescue. The reports came in fragments: ship manifests, harbor tallies, medical station counts, regimental rolls. Ramsay stood before the plotting boards with exhaustion carved into him. In 9 days, he had slept perhaps 15 hours. But the totals kept rising higher than anyone dared hope. 338,226 men evacuated. A figure that seemed unreal compared with the original estimate of 45,000. Ramsay had saved not a fraction of Britain's army but nearly the whole of it, over 95%. British troops returned alongside French and Belgian soldiers who had held the line long enough for evacuation to continue. Without those 9 days, Britain's defense would have rested on untrained militia carrying hunting rifles. Churchill's famous vow to fight on the beaches would have rung hollow if the men trained to fight had been marching toward captivity. But victory carried a heavy bill. 226 Allied vessels were lost, including 6 British and 3 French destroyers. 944 RAF aircraft were destroyed. 11,000 men were killed or captured during the evacuation alone. And the abandoned equipment defied belief. Thousands of vehicles, 2,400 artillery pieces, and the ammunition needed for a modern army. Britain had preserved its soldiers but sacrificed nearly all its heavy weapons. Historians would later dissect Dynamo and credit Ramsay's relentless creativity, his insistence on beach operations despite their inefficiency, his radical use of civilian craft, his division of ship types to prevent congestion, his creation of multiple approach routes, and his ability to constantly adjust plans even as the battlefield shifted hour by hour. On June 4th, a secure telephone call arrived from the Admiralty. Ramsay was ordered to London for immediate briefing. Climbing out of his tunnels into the sunlight, blinking like a man surfacing from another world, he left Dover as something he had never been before, one of Britain's greatest wartime heroes. The Admiralty could have retired him with honors after Dunkirk. Instead, they recognized that modern war required exactly the type of mind Ramsay possessed, a commander able to manage vast, complex, multi-service operations under maximum pressure. Between 1940 and 1944, he applied those lessons again and again. He oversaw naval planning for the Dieppe raid in 1942, a brutal failure that killed or captured nearly 3,000. Lessons he absorbed and filed away for future operations. Those lessons crystallized when he became naval commander for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. This time he wasn't bringing men home, he was sending them ashore. Husky required coordinating 2,600 vessels and landing more than 160,000 troops across multiple beaches. Ramsay applied the discipline he had honed at Dunkirk, precise timetables, separate approach lanes, contingency plans, redundant communication systems. Despite violent Mediterranean storms, the landings succeeded. Sicily fell in 38 days. But a far larger operation was already taking shape. Allied leaders knew that to defeat Nazi Germany, they would have to land on the shores of France itself. The invasion would be the largest military operation in human history, and it required a naval commander who understood how to coordinate thousands of vessels, timing, supply chains, air support, and ground forces into one synchronized blow. In October 1943, General Dwight D. Eisenhower made the choice that surprised no one. He requested Admiral Bertram Ramsay as the naval commander for Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion. Ramsay stepped into his new role knowing exactly how enormous the coming operation would be. The naval phase of Overlord, codenamed Operation Neptune, demanded the coordination of an armada on a scale no military had ever attempted. Where Dunkirk had evacuated 338,000 men, Neptune aimed to land 156,000 soldiers in a single day, across 5 beaches, each with its own tides, terrain, and defenses. And behind those first waves, Ramsay had to maintain a constant flow of fuel, food, vehicles, ammunition, and medical supplies, enough to support a modern army advancing deep into France. Failure would not simply delay victory, it could allow Germany to re-strengthen and prolong the war for years. At Southwick House near Portsmouth, Ramsay and his multinational staff spent 7 relentless months turning this impossible concept into a workable plan. Every calculation, tides, ship spacing, channel routes, convoy timing, was checked again and again. Putting 5 divisions ashore across 50 miles of defended coast required a fleet of nearly 7,000 ships, from battleships to tiny landing craft. Behind them followed hundreds more vessels carrying the supplies that would determine whether the beachhead could survive the first German counterattacks. He structured the massive fleet into task forces, the Americans striking Utah and Omaha, the British and Canadians landing at Gold, Juno, and Sword. Each force had its own routes, timetables, and fire support plans. Minefields that the Germans had laid for 4 years forced Ramsay to assign almost 300 minesweepers to clear safe lanes in darkness, hours ahead of the invasion. The naval bombardment plan alone showed how far Ramsay had evolved since Dunkirk. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers were assigned exact target grids, firing schedules, and communications links with forward troops. Ramsay's system allowed naval guns to answer calls from soldiers pinned on the beaches within minutes, something no navy had ever attempted at this scale. His boldest idea was the Mulberry Harbors, 2 artificial ports built in England and towed to France. He knew the Allies could not rely on capturing a major harbor quickly, so he pushed for these vast floating structures capable of unloading thousands of tons a day. Critics called them fantasy. Ramsay called them necessary. By early June, everything depended on weather. A violent storm forced Eisenhower to delay the invasion from June 5th. When meteorologists predicted a brief, fragile break in the weather, Ramsay supported the decision to move forward, despite knowing the seas would be rough and timing tight. Before dawn on June 6, 1944, he watched the Armada set out. Over 7,000 vessels stretching across the channel in disciplined columns. Minesweepers led the way, followed by bombardment ships, then the vast waves of landing craft and transports. The naval guns opened fire at 5:50 a.m., followed by bombing runs meant to soften defenses. Not everything went smoothly. Smoke obscured targets, communications faltered, and the rough seas threw off timing. But Ramsay's layers of contingencies kept the assault from collapsing. At Omaha, American troops faced brutal opposition. Destroyers risked running aground by charging close to shore to blast German strongpoints. Elsewhere, British and Canadian troops advanced behind steady naval fire that cleared beach exits. By nightfall, 156,000 troops were on French soil, an outcome far better than the dire estimates planners had feared. In the days that followed, Mulberry Harbor sections arrived and were assembled under fire, giving the Allies the port capacity needed to sustain their advance. Ramsay continued directing naval operations, supply convoys, gunfire missions, clearing captured harbors, quietly enabling every push inland. On January 2, 1945, while flying to a conference in Brussels, Ramsay's plane crashed in heavy fog after takeoff from Paris. He died instantly at 61, just months before the war he helped shape reached its end. His loss deprived Britain of a commander whose unique combination of discipline, creativity, and calm under pressure had proven indispensable. The Admiral, once forced into retirement, became the architect of 3 turning points: the Dunkirk evacuation, the landings in Sicily, and the naval plan for D-Day. Without Dunkirk, Britain might have been compelled into negotiation in 1940. Without Neptune, liberating Western Europe could have taken years longer, or unfolded under very different geopolitical conditions. Ramsay's work did not simply support the Allied victory, it helped make that victory possible.